Hello everyone and welcome back to TowerGate. It is TowerGate day number 624. 624. Monday, December the 3rd, 2018. Thank you so much for tuning in. Let's see here. Alrighty, well, the riots in France are getting worse. And they're chanting and calling for Macron to go. They're saying Macron must go. Now, these riots have been going on now for more than a week. They started out just as protests, primarily in France and a couple other major cities. But now it's all over the country. I'm sure many of you have been watching the videos as I have. And it's getting really, they're calling them now violent protests. They're assaulting cops, taking their guns, flipping over cars, starting them on fire, vandalizing. Like I said about 3 or 4 videos ago, the French know how to do, there's one thing they do really well, and that is riot. Okay? And they have a tendency to get results when they riot. And it's not, it's not calming itself down. It's getting worse day after day after day. And you have to wonder if this continues in another week from now, how bad it's going to be, because the protests are getting larger, more violent. They're just destroying the place. They're just, burning the place to the ground all across the country. It's getting out of control, and the police certainly can't control it at this point. And I was looking at a story that was showing the economic numbers in France. I didn't realize that their unemployment was so high, and that the average wage, yearly wage, is so low. The level of people in France who live in what we would consider here in the States as in the poverty range is much higher in France than it is in the United States. The unemployment, of course, in the U.S., we have, very low unemployment right now. In France, it's close to 10%. In fact, it's over 10%. 10.9%, I believe, is the number I saw. So you've got high unemployment. You have got very high taxes. You have got many people living at the poverty level or below. A larger share, like almost 40%. Yeah, it's like 35% of people are literally in the poverty range in France. So you can see this has all probably been building and building and building. And I think what's really needs to be focused on here is there's something underlying these protests that's going on. And I haven't seen too many man-on-the-street interviews on this topic, but you're getting commentators who speak English who are talking about this. And, from the French citizens' point of view, they see their president, Macron, really always going head-to-head with Trump. But they look at Trump and they look at the United States, and they see Americans' taxes being cut. They see the American economy is cranking. They see good things happening. They see Trump fighting for trade deals to protect American jobs. You see Trump out there talking about nationalism and talking about, hey, I'm putting America first. And when I come to France or I come to the EU, I'm going to be fighting for the United States, not for some globalist technocrats in Europe. And so a lot of French man on the street, the French citizen, the average French citizen, is looking at this and going, man, I wish we had a Trump. I wish we had a guy who was putting France first. I wish we had a president who was cutting our taxes and growing our economy and getting our unemployment down and actually doing something for the French workers, the French people. And so you have this really sharp contrast, and that's what Trump does on the world stage that a lot of people, I don't think, focus enough attention on. When you look at Trump and you look at other leaders around the world, other than a handful of about a dozen or so other leaders who have been elected, like Mr. Orban and others, and the new president in Sweden, or not Sweden, the Netherlands, when you look at these more nationalist type leaders who have come in riding on the coattails of Donald Trump internationally, and you look at how well they're doing, and then you look at all the EU-sided technocrats and the globalists, and you look at what they're doing in their countries, it's creating this very stark contrast between nationalism and globalism. And you can see, and so can the European people who live in these countries that are really subsidiaries of the European Union. They're controlled by the European Union. Their leaders of their country are mere puppets to the EU. This stark contrast that Trump is creating on the world stage it's being noticed, and it's being noticed a lot by people in the countries who don't have a Trump-style president, who's out there fighting for their country, fighting for nationalism. They're still in the old, worn-out, defeated model of globalism. And these people will be the last to learn. And it's not so much that they don't know in the EU, in other places. It's not that they don't understand this. It's just that they don't care. Their desire for global government and for a European superstate, their desire for that is far greater than their desire to see the average European citizen have a good life. And the average European citizen is not stupid. They can see this. I know. I lived in Europe. I can tell you that these are people who are very smart. They're very in touch with the world that they live in. And they pay attention to these things. I would say more so than even Americans. Because, most Americans, if they got a job, if they feel pretty good about their income situation, if they feel pretty good about their tax situation, if they feel pretty good about the way things are generally, they generally just go about their lives and they don't pay too much attention. They're not obsessed with the day-to-day politics. But I found that when I was living in Europe that on average, the average European is much more in tune with not so much the party politics, but things going on in the world and as it relates to government and things and such. They're a very tuned-in group of people. They've been sold out. They've been sold into global slavery, just like Obama and Clinton and the Bushes tried to do to us, and they were nearly successful. And if it wasn't for Trump, they probably would have succeeded. Had we gotten the rotten Reverend Clinton, we would probably be full-scale into globalism now, probably to the point where there would be almost no turning back. We can see how difficult it is for Greece and Spain and some of these other countries, especially the UK, trying to leave the EU. It's like I said, the Hotel California song. You can check out anytime you leave, anytime you want, but you can never leave. And once you're locked into that globalist thing, it's really hard to get out. And I think that Trump understood that. And that's why so much of what he does in his agenda is driven by this move toward nationalism and away from globalism. Because he understood this a long time ago. A long, long time ago. Trump was talking about these things 20 years ago. So it's not hard to understand why the citizens of France are now rioting in the streets to the degree that they are and calling for Macron to go. Now, Macron was just recently elected. He's still got like over 4 years left. And quite honestly, I'm not sure he's going to make it. If these protests continue to grow and get more and more violent, as we have been seeing over the past few days, I'm not really sure that Macron is going to be able to survive this. Because, the video I'm seeing and the number of riots that are now going on across all of France, the number of people who are out there participating now, and it's not just the party that was opposed to Macron in the election. It's much broader than that. This is bringing people from even people who voted for Macron. This is bringing a large swath across a pretty wide variance of political ideologies in France. This issue is beyond any political ideology or party in France. This is basic, dollars and cents economics to most of the people, the common people in France, which makes up the majority. And that's who is being affected by this, and these are the people who are hitting the streets in massive numbers. I am not aware of the procedure, if there's a recall procedure or what procedure that they have in France for getting rid of someone like Macron. Typically, like I said, what they do to get rid of a leader in Macron is they get some charges on them because they're all corrupt as hell. you can usually find some charges. Now, I don't know that Macron is all that corrupt, not like his predecessors, but there'll certainly, I would think, be a certain point where there is just a no confidence vote, where he simply doesn't have the ability to lead his country anymore. When you lose, a large percentage of your country, which is what we see happening in France right now, I don't know how you can lead your country. And a lot of his problem is that you get the feeling that he really doesn't care that much about France, that he sees France as just one piece of a much larger puzzle. And you get the feeling that Macron, and I think a lot of French people think this too, is that his focus is on the EU. He sees the EU and the European superstate as this great thing that's eventually going to be a dominant, challenge the US or China or something like that. And this is where I think Macron's focus is, and I think this is becoming obvious to a lot of people in France. He really doesn't care that much about France. He cares mostly about a much larger issue, and that is the European superstate. But it looks like to me that if he doesn't get a handle on things in the next week or two, we just may see Macron being forced out. How that's going to happen, I don't know. But we'll keep watching, because the story is really starting to get interesting. Bob Goodlatte was on Maria Bartiromo Sunday morning. I'm sure most of you saw that. And the two things mostly that he talked about in the first part of the interview, which is what I'm going to focus on, of course, he talked about, the first thing Bartiromo talked about was the investigations and what's going on with the investigations. And she was kind of dragging him over the coals a little bit for this idea that she thinks that now the Democrats are going to take over. Why didn't you interview Comey and Lynch and all these other people earlier? I guess she was kind of given the impression that she thought they drugged their feet a little bit on all this stuff and have taken too long to get to the bottom of things. And he basically said, well, we've interviewed a lot of people. We've had to review tons of documents. We had to wait to get these documents. And we didn't know who to interview until we got the documents. We had to get the documents first to know the questions to ask of the people. Then we had to get the people in here. And he said, typically in any investigation, you start around the edges, and at the bottom you work your way to the top. So they're finally at the top of the food chain, which is Loretta Lynch and Comey. And based on all the information they've seen from documents and other witnesses, they now have their questions for Comey and Lynch. So he was kind of defending himself a little bit, and I kind of understand that, but I do believe, like Maria Bartiromo, they could have moved quicker. And then he also talked about the fact again, which he keeps talking about and others keep talking about, is that these investigations after the midterm, or after the Democrats take over in January, they're going to move over into the committees of Lindsey Graham, the Judiciary Committee, and into the Senate Oversight Committee, which is, that would be Ron Johnson. Now, Lindsey Graham, I've never been a big fan. I know a lot of you have never been a big fan, but there's no question that since the death of Senator Magoo, that Lindsey Graham has really taken, he's really changed, I think. And I think that the Kavanaugh hearings really hit a nerve with Lindsey Graham. I think he's loaded for bear, and I think he's looking for retribution, because I think there's something about, I don't know what it was, but there's something about that, the way the Kavanaugh hearings, the way the Democrats played that, which they played it very badly, by the way. There's something about that hit a nerve with Graham. And so while I generally wouldn't put a lot of stock in Graham, in this particular case, I think I'm feeling pretty good about the fact that he is going to be very hard on this deal, very persistent. So Goodlatte's saying, hey, we're turning everything we've got over to those two committees. And he said, I've had private conversations with Lindsey Graham. He's assured me that he is going to take what we've learned from our investigation in the first 2 years, he's going to take it to the Senate, and he's going to proceed from there. So the investigation continues just in the Senate. Now, that's actually good in a couple ways. One, because the Senate Judiciary Committee is probably the second or third most powerful committee in the entire Congress. The Senate Judiciary Committee has more, I would say, more, I don't know if it has more power, but I guess it really does, more authority and more power, but it's just looked at differently than any of the House committees. And so Lindsey Graham, and of course it's going to be a presidential election year coming into 2020, and that always motivates any politician, including Lindsey Graham. So I'm feeling pretty good about that. And his relationship with Trump is drastically improved because President Trump is a good foreign policy president, and Lindsey Graham has a huge focus on foreign policy. So I think that they're in cahoots there. I don't know that they're always in cahoots on domestic policy, economics, and trade and things, but you've even seen Graham come around on that. And if you remember, Lindsey Graham was kind of one of those middle of the roaders on immigration, but he's really come to Trump's side of the issue on immigration and has become more of a hardliner. So, we can see the impact, of the sort of transition that Lindsey Graham has gone through, and it's a good one, and it bodes well for all of us, and for Trump, and for exposing the deep state. Now, the other character, Ron Johnson, he's kind of a peculiar looking guy. Not looking, but he's a peculiar individual, I think. He looks sometimes like he's kind of disheveled and like he's like a little crazy, or like, pre-Alzheimer's or something, like he's not, like scatterbrained. He doesn't come off as being this really sharp, like a Gates or someone like that who speaks quickly and has their thoughts together, and really he's really kind of disheveled and kind of looks like he's not quite got his shit together. But in fact, Ron Johnson is pretty solid, and he is pretty tenacious, and he is a digger. In other words, what I'm saying is that that's a pretty powerful committee he's on as well, that he heads, is the Senate Oversight Committee, and he's also going to be getting these documents, and he's going to continue and pick up where this left off. And so I think it bodes pretty well for where we go after the first of the year when these investigations move into the Senate. And something else I heard Goodlatte say is that they are going to be releasing the transcripts, not just from Comey, but the transcripts from all their witnesses. Now, I don't know if he means after they finish their investigation, or if he means that they're going to move everything to the Senate, and then at some point it will all be released. I'm hoping he means that they're going to release their transcripts as soon as this term is over. So when the Democrats take over, the last thing Goodlatte's committee does on their way out the door is release the transcripts of the interviews they've done and information from documents they've reviewed. So really hoping that we see this stuff, and I think it will be important to move the story forward, and that's exactly what we need. We need to get this stuff out. So much of this relies on getting the word out and competing with the corporate media, which is, of course, trying to cover up the crimes. We need to do a better job of competing in the media war. We have Claire McCaskill out there doing an interview with a paper in Missouri where she essentially is blaming Democrats for the reason why she lost. And she lost by 6 points in that race to Josh Hawley. And she's talking specifically about the way they handled the Kavanaugh hearing. Yeah, the Kavanaugh hearing really, really hurt the Democrats. They would have done much better. They might have held the Senate. McCaskill believes that she would not have been defeated had they not botched the Kavanaugh hearings so badly. And she laid it out herself. She said, hey, it looks bad. I mean, look at what happened. It looks bad. And she laid out, Feinstein holds on to this stuff, and then they release it at the very end. And then we had all these other people jump on board. We have these people coming out of the woodwork, this nutcase Avenatti, and then the media decides to give him and the crazy people he brought forward credibility. It stained the entire thing, even if there was something legitimate there. Originally with Blasey Ford, that was all washed away because of the fools that jumped on the bandwagon. And so she lays out pretty clearly. She obviously understands pretty clearly exactly what happened to her and how it backfired on her, and she believes cost her seat in Missouri. And I think she's largely correct. Trump had a great week last week in trade. Of course, he finally got the signed deal with Mexico and Canada to replace the NAFTA. He says he's going to kill NAFTA this week, regardless of whether the Senate and the House ratify. I don't think the House has to. I think it's just the Senate. But even he says, hey, they better ratify my new trade deal because I'm killing the old one this week, and we won't have any trade deals. Okay, so it's going to be my trade deal or nothing, because I'm going to kill the old one. So when they go to vote on my trade deal, it won't be voting on my trade deal, and if they don't vote on it, we go back to the NAFTA. No. He's killing NAFTA this week. Dead and gone. It'll be over. Gone. So he said they'll be voting on a trade deal or no trade deal. And it'll be my trade deal or no trade deal. But more importantly, he also has finally reached an agreement with China. And he's not going to add the additional tariffs. He and Chairman Xi have agreed on a trade package, which I read the details of, and it's really it's going to end up being somewhere around $300 to $360 billion more trade that's now going to go from the U.S. to China. So that's another $300 billion, which means that he's pretty much almost eliminated the trade deficit. It was $500 billion before he took office. He's now got it down to about $150 billion, somewhere between 150 and 2. So he's reduced the trade deficit between the U.S. and China with this final negotiation by more than 50%. So that's a job well done right there, and that's going to pay tremendous benefits, create a lot of jobs, a lot of economic activity, and it's almost surely going to be the thing that guarantees he gets reelected in 2020, because this economy is just going to be absolutely rocking and rolling as these trade measures with China begin to take effect in the months to come. Watched a crazy interview with a reporter interviewing a lot of these migrants who, many of them now are turning around and going home. Some of them have decided to stay in Mexico and apply for asylum there. They're getting run out of Tijuana. The mayor doesn't want them there. The people in Tijuana are running them out of town. They're being forced to go back and retrace their steps. So I'm watching an interview, and they're interviewing a couple of the migrant caravan people, and they are really, really angry. And according to these people in this interview, they are saying that they're really angry because their leaders lied to them about how easy it would be to enter the U.S. They were told that if they got a whole bunch of them together and stormed the border, that there's nothing we could do and they could pour into the country. They were told that this was the plan by the organizers, by the leaders, which just goes to show exactly what Trump and other people on the right had been saying, contrary to the left, who made it sound like this was just a, this was just a natural event that happened. All these people came together and decided to rush the border. No. This was an organized plot, and it's got a lot of ties to Democrats and people like Soros and his friends. They're now saying that their leaders lied to them. Now the next thing we need to know is to state clearly for the world to know who their leaders were. It's all coming out, my friends. Huge media fail for the left, and they'll be eating crow on this one, but they'll never admit it. And speaking of the mayor of Tijuana, I don't know if you saw the interview with him, but he's now sporting a red MAGA hat, but instead of Make America Great Again, his hat says Make Tijuana Great Again. It's just like the red MAGA hat, like the one I have and many of you have, except for his says Make Tijuana Great Again. And it's really funny. But he's giving a press conference, and he is now calling for the arrest of the caravan organizers. And he says that it is a federal crime in Mexico to organize something like this. It is a federal crime, and he is calling for the organizers to be arrested, and yes, they should be, and exposed, because when they are arrested and are exposed, we'll find out where the roots of that little deal were and who they're connected to. And the names Soros and the Rotten Reverend will be all over it. Take it to the bank. The Reverend has a lot of problems, in case you haven't noticed, right along with Uncle Bob. Many of you have commented on this. This is some stuff I'm getting to from yesterday I didn't get to. Rodenstein, of course, we're learning, was informed of the Cohen plea deal 2 days before Assistant AG Whitaker. What does this tell us? Well, it tells us that Trump put in Assistant AG Whitaker as a standby until he gets his permanent guy in there. But it's clear that the deep staters within the DOJ and the FBI are still there, and they're still playing their games. They're essentially treating Whitaker as persona non grata. They're simply not really cooperating with him, not respecting him, not paying attention to him. They're still running their own little game within their own little cabal. And I think that has something to do with this recent raid, which I'll get to in a minute. Whitaker can't be happy about that, by the way. Also, there's another, this will make lawsuit number 3. There's now another lawsuit being filed against Whitaker as he's now being accused of FTC violations while he worked at this Miami watchdog firm, which I believe he was like one of the heads of it. But I think it was more of a figurehead, and he was saying he really wasn't directly involved. There's a letter or two that suggests he may have been more involved than he says because he sent a letter to someone who was threatening legal action or something. So anyway, there may be more to this than meets the eye. I don't really know. But either way, he's a temporary placement in there to replace Sessions until Trump gets his regular person in there. And we know he's got Trump's back. And I think Trump just wanted somebody in there that could stop the bleeding. I don't expect Whitaker's going to take any great action. I would like to see him do that. But I think primarily he's got something else on his mind. But I do get the feeling, remember, it was Sessions who appointed Huber and told Huber, you're going to be working with the IG because the IG has a staff of over, 400 and some odd people. So you can use, working with the IG, you can use his staff, Mr. Huber. So I think that what has happened is Whitaker knows he can't come in and start making his own independent moves, doing this and doing that with his name on it. So what he's doing is essentially occupying what Sessions was doing before. He's using Huber and the IG to get things going. And so I have no doubt that once Whitaker came in, that one of the first things he probably did was sit down with Horowitz and probably had some conversations with Huber. Because it's Huber that's supposed to be investigating the Clinton Foundation stuff, which is what Whitaker is all about. So my guess is it's probably Whitaker that put his foot in the rear end of Huber to get him to move and to start taking actions. And of course, he's working directly with the IG. Here's something that I don't know that we all knew about. It's something I heard about a long time ago. We probably covered it here, but at the time, it's more relevant now than it was then. So we learned that in June of 2010, Slick Willie, Bill Clinton, met with Putin in his home, in Putin's home, in Russia. And in that same weekend that Clinton was there, he gave a 1-hour speech to a bunch of oligarchs. He was paid $500,000 for the speech. 1 month after that, in July of 2010, 10 Russian agents were released by the Obama administration without charges. They describe them here as agents, but if I remember the original story, they were actually gangsters. They were Russians who were involved in illegal activities and gangster-like activities, mob-like activities, organized crime type guys. So these are like Russian mobsters, is who these people are. Whether or not they had connections or associations with the Uranium-1, 10X, or any of these sorts of things, I don't know if they're connected in that group. I just know that they were like Russian mobsters, Russian gangsters. But here we have Clinton meeting in 2010 with Putin at his home in Russia. The same weekend, he gives a speech, collects $500,000, then to these Russian oligarchs, who then turn around and give $148 million to the Clinton Foundation. The next thing you know, a month after that, these 10 gangsters are let out of jail and released without any charges, even though they had them dead to rights. And then we get the Uranium-1 deal. Maybe that is what Huber and Horowitz are focusing a lot of their energy on right now. And maybe that has something to do with the recent activity around the stuff that's all we've been hearing in the last week about the Clinton Foundation. It seems like they're tightening the noose, I guess is probably the word. So yesterday I was asking the question, who was behind the raid on this whistleblower, Mr. Kane? And today it's still not clear. I spent a lot of time trying to figure that out. No one still seems to know. So I just am going to think through this with common sense, okay? Just my own rational common sense. There's really, yesterday I thought, okay, you got 3 players here. Who could have ordered that raid on Mr. Kane. And what was it that Mr. Kane had that he was a whistleblower for? What did he give to Horowitz that Horowitz turned around and gave to the House and Senate Intelligence Committees? Well, he gave him whistleblower information that showed that Uncle Bob the Executioner, Bob Mueller, head of the FBI at the time when all this went down, despite overwhelming evidence of crimes that they knew about, he's got the proof, just like Mr. Campbell's got the proof. They knew about all this stuff going down. Yet Uncle Bob did not prosecute it or even really do a thorough investigation. They essentially swept it under the rug. And we know that prior to that, in the previous investigation, the 10X investigation, where Rodenstein was the prosecuting attorney in the District of Maryland, they had a bunch of players, like 19 people. Almost every one of them walked scot-free. 3 guys ended up getting charges, but they were very light. They could have got 20, 30 years in jail for what they were doing. Instead, they got very light prison sentences. One of them got a little heavier sentence than the other 2. But they got only 3 of these guys of the 19 who they literally could have indicted and given long time to. They got away scot-free. And then they buried this thing. They stopped it. They didn't investigate any further. They stopped it right there, which is probably has something to do with what this whistleblower released to Horowitz. And then we hear on Friday night from John Solomon that Huber orchestrated or directed another raid on another whistleblower. Or actually, it was Huber who contacted this whistleblower, the same type of stuff, information that that Mueller's FBI had information of crimes that he did not prosecute or even investigate. Swept that under the rug too. So all this was all swept under the rug, and you get the feeling that it was all done so that the Uranium One deal could go through, which is a huge scandal on so many levels. Okay, so I want to go back to yesterday and try to look at these entities again, but I want to add another entity in here that I didn't mention yesterday, because I think this may be what we're talking about. Okay, so why would Huber send a raid, FBI raid, on Mr. Kane? Well, Huber is working with Horowitz on this very issue. Certainly, Horowitz had to share this with Huber. And if Huber thought that this whistleblower had more information, he simply would have called him up or called his lawyer and said, listen, we want to make sure you got everything. Great job. Thanks a lot for the whistleblowing, giving us the documents. But are you sure you're giving us everything? Because there's still some, missing pieces of the puzzle. You might have some more information that could help clear that up. That's kind of how that would have been handled. They wouldn't have sent a SWAT team with 16 guys over there to raid his house for 6 hours. He's a cooperating whistleblower with them. Why would you do that to the guy who's helping you out? They wouldn't. So I am now prepared to eliminate Huber and Horowitz as having anything to do with the raid on Mr. Kane. So that brings us to Whitaker. Well, Whitaker is the acting attorney general. Usually the attorney general doesn't personally direct raids. Okay, he assigns, delegates things to U.S. attorneys and prosecutors. They don't do that themselves. They contact the prosecutor, U.S. attorney says, okay, we got information on this, we want you to investigate that or whatever. So this is not something Whitaker would have done himself, especially having to do with the whistleblowing on the Clinton Foundation and Uncle Bob, who he clearly has a problem with. That would be just politically stupid, and he's not that stupid. So I can think that we can rule out not only Huber, but we can also rule out Whitaker. Who does that leave? Well, from yesterday's video, that would only leave Uncle Bob the Executioner. And yes, Uncle Bob is the target of these whistleblowing documents. He is the target of what's going to come out on Monday evening, according to John Solomon. Also, another whistleblower on the Clinton thing. So I think that it just doesn't seem like Uncle Bob would look so bad if we were to see in broad daylight that Uncle Bob, here's a whistleblower, releases his information to the IG and the DOJ, and then Uncle Bob goes after him. I mean, he can't stop. I mean, the guy's already given up the documents, and he already has it in his head. He knows they can go do an interview. So Uncle Bob would not help himself here. He might be really upset about it. He might want to get this guy, but to make a move like that would be stupid. So I'm thinking that probably what happened here is that when Horowitz's people gave this information to the Senate Intelligence Committee, which is very deep state, Warner and Burr and all them other guys, I think they leaked it to one of their friends in the deep state DOJ and FBI. And it was someone, part of the cabal that's still there in the swamp,